Hey everybody, so actually we just got off a curriculum call with an animation class. And you might wonder, what am I doing on a curriculum call for animation class? This actually going for a bunch of years of one of the schools that I'm involved with out in the general greater Los Angeles area. They have animation courses that overlap with their digital games creation stuff. And obviously there's different constraints, requirements, tools, pipeline challenges for animation for game use than animation for TV shorts, for film, for different uses in marketing or things like that. And so I just want to share some of the thoughts that came up there in case it's something that interests you, even though I am not an animator. Literally one of the courses I taught at Georgia Tech was basically animation for games. And so I had lots of experience at that intersection of, okay, well, yeah, but in Unity, there's different constraints and affordances and priorities and challenges than in pre-rendered linear media space. A few of those notes that kind of came up in no particular order. Maya still used largely in AAA studios. A lot of smaller companies, independent freelance creators have been moving towards Blender, if only because their student discount licenses on Maya expired and Blender's free forever, and or there's other collaborators on the team who are using Blender, and so they need to be able to work in that format, the .blend files, natively, because that's what the other assets are, because other people on the team, their Maya student licenses expire, and they don't have the big company behind them with that budget. But one of the things that happens so we've got a 3D trainer recently in Home Team, Tyler Funk. Happy to have him with us, longtime project lead and multiple time contributor for many different projects in Home Team. But part of what's great about what he does is that when you're making content in Maya, in Blender, in 3D Studio, in Rhino, in whatever 3D pipeline you're using, there's a lot of things that you could spend hours following a tutorial on how to make hair work a certain way, on how to make grass, and how to handle different kind of effects of water surfaces and materials. And then the instant you bring that asset into Unity, Unreal, a proprietary engine, some other system, you're starting from scratch on the hair, on the grass, on the water material surfaces, because real time has incredibly different constraints to render something at 30, 60 frames a second plus 90 plus in each eye for VR at high resolution than a pre-rendered media where it might actually look better and have a lot of sophisticated abilities about, again, things like hair falling that are you leveraging particle systems and calculations in ways that just aren't going to be real time. They're going to take a little more time for the light and the ray casting bounces and so on. And so a lot of your material properties and things don't translate across, right? You get your UV mapping across, you might get your material assignments across, you're obviously getting your mesh data and your rigging. So much else doesn't come across, including 502 optimization concerns are non-existent in the 2D space. Tyler Funking, our 3D art trainer and Home Team, when he was working with somebody on, or I think he was showing for one of his projects he's leading right now, Triune Legacy, and he had rendered a really neat particle effect of fire in his 3D modeling program, but then rendered it out as a sprite card to play it as a particle effect inside of his game engine. And so there are ways occasionally, if you're clever, to leverage the two, right? Or it's sort of like you could pre-render raycasted lighting effects and shadows that are crisp and so on. Well, and then if you're playing your game in isometric, you can use those on card assets. You can use those in full backgrounds, all kinds of other tricks to this stuff for tiles in a 2D game. Another element came up, and speaking of, again, Home Team, it's often a part of where, because we're in teams with things, you have to worry about the things that on a solo case you don't. Often a lot of the student project work was solo, and it's okay to start there. But as you're moving towards teams, it becomes increasingly important to have one of the other people who are volunteering there from industry to speak with the teachers about the curriculum, the importance of naming conventions in your file output, right? You can't just have a bunch of random file names or parentheses one, final copy after it's like a submitted file in a classroom. And even within internally to your models and internally to your image assets, that your layers, that your rigging joints, that your different meshes have meaningful names. And that stuff becomes critical when you're either working with a teammate to carry that same asset forward when you're maybe done with your portion of it, or when it's being integrated into a game. So for example, in Unity, when we drop in a 3D art asset, let's say I rebuilt it initially out of dropping in a bunch of cubes in Blender and stretching and contriving and extruding and knife cutting and splitting and all the different things we do inside of Blender. Well, when I export that as an FBX or something, if I didn't make a point of renaming the joints because I didn't care, because I was just clicking where I saw stuff, inside of Unity, the collision data, the meshes are all going to be called cube, sphere, and that's useless, right? Because so is every other model dropped in. So it does become important for team purposes as you move towards team projects to work on the importance of having some clear naming conventions for those kind of things. That will help the work seem more professional. To the professional point, we also mentioned the importance in those discussions of portfolio, which in the old curriculum was there, but it was saved until the very end. And part of what we did, this is actually a note barred from when I was teaching that animation class at Georgia Tech, and we did the same thing with graduate students at Georgia Tech, was the portfolios. We actually had them start a third to a halfway through their time in that class or that time in the program rather than saving it until the end. And what it does is it helps us, think ahead about when we're thinking about a portfolio. It's going to have some gaps in it, but it's going to have gaps that we're thinking concretely about what's going to go here. What path do I see myself going down? How is this going to fit together? What story am I telling here? And then over time, you're filling it in. That also leaves you a lot more time for hindsight and iteration. Portfolios like resumes are the sort of thing where it benefits so much from having some time between when you first get it down and technically there, and then picking at it and tweaking at it and working on it over the time ahead helps so much because you're able to kind of connect the dots easier going backwards. I think it's an old Steve Jobs lines about how fonts found their way to the Apple system or something, but it's easier to connect the dots looking backwards than forwards. And so it's helpful to kind of get that foundation in place, but then have time to iterate on it. Because if instead you save it until your last week or your last project, basically you just pile everything in a corner of the internet, and then that's how you're representing yourself. And ultimately how you represent yourself is going to be as much a decider of who you're going to work with, what opportunities are afforded to you, whether it's at a studio, whether it's juggling contract work, whether it's producing content to go on Turbo Squid in the asset store and independent packages of bundles on Itch and on Gumroad and so on. In any of those contexts, how you're presenting your work is going to be at least as important as the ability of the work itself. We also spoke to the need for motion graphics designers, people who, if they perhaps want to do YouTube videos in the future, such as I do, or which even though I don't get heavily involved in the motion graphics side, you've seen it on plenty of other channels, where how they're handling their titles, how they're handling their transitions, how they're handling their splash image, intro animations, or things like that, are also the sort of skill set where it can help them better show their portfolio. I have used a little bit of light skills in that area for showing our trailers for our games, for showing the occasional demo videos of work that we're working on. That includes also how to chop up your work into short animations for GIF or GIF or GIF or however you want to say it. Formats have increasingly become obviously a key piece of how games, movies, shows, and so on are finding their way to have a footprint online. Is still, can I get a compelling 15, 30-second clip that's silent out of this animation? And having an eye for that, working with that format, compressing them to the correct sizes, dimensions, proportions, and so on, just becomes useful skills to have as you're trying to navigate those things. And again, that's as likely to be relevant to your own portfolio, to showing that work in a way that someone might just press play on a video, want to sit back and watch it, rather than having to do the legwork of digging through all of your links and reading all the text. It can very much help to have them sort of shepherded through that, as well as for potentially building or accumulating your audience online. Lots of people in our game development circles, of course, find their audience through those short clips of gameplay in a tweet are so much more interesting to look at than a still screenshot, than a some other just text-only post or something, than a link that's outgoing they have to click on to find the information of. If you're making animations for, even if it's going to wind up as linear media, in a digital format, then you're going to be posting it to Instagram, to Twitter, to Facebook, maybe a piece on YouTube, maybe a piece on some other platform entirely, perhaps in 5 years, a platform that doesn't exist yet. In that case, right, you have to deal with different proportions, different ratios, different time lengths, with or without sound, and learning to think of the same piece that you're producing from that kind of framing, from those kind of uses, becomes increasingly helpful as you're trying to adapt your material for those kind of purposes. Even if someone's main reason for animating, priority, ultimate goal, career destination is something maybe a little more creatively fulfilling to them, many people do also wind up using those same skill sets in adjacent marketing work, in helping make trailers for things. One of the exercises I mentioned there, we've actually seen largely, I've mostly seen it from art students, or from audio students rather, who are working on kind of sound effects and scoring. And trailer cutting is kind of its own separate art, but it's basically, can they take a existing piece of media, do some game capture, maybe potentially short capture of an episode. And obviously, you're not grabbing the whole thing, but just bits and pieces to try to construct from it a compelling thing that really catches your attention immediately, hooks you on it, helps get you interested in watching more of the story. It's just one of those kind of examples where when you're using recognizable media, and again, there's questions there about what is or isn't fair use, and not wanting to use too much of somebody else's property or so on, making clear this is not official work. But it can help resonate with people if they can understand the context you're drawing from. They can make a connection to how you've repurposed it differently. And it's a bit like if you've seen those YouTube videos where it's showing if the show The Office was a horror show, or if The Shining was a family fun-friendly one. Exercises along those lines, not necessarily that far, and necessarily about movies or TV. We also mentioned in there sort of parting notes with students who might be nearing graduation, how fundamental it is to recognize that when you're navigating the adult life that is jobs and not just trying to get an A on an assignment, it really does matter that people get the impression that you seem like you're going to be decent to work with. They can approach you with questions, that you can accept feedback and process it and be constructive about it. And these are things we can take for granted because we're like, well, if I'm just good at the work, I can get an A on it. If I'm just good at the work, I can get paid to do it. And there's a story that several of us shared. And in my example, it was, or shared a version of, where in my example, it was a recruiter. She's a major head recruiter, several of game studios. She's bounced around over the years, who the studio interviewed six different candidates for an animation role. And everyone on the team really, really wanted this one person that she interviewed to be the one they bring in. And the recruiter was like, yeah, that's the person least good at animation, which is what this job is for. And everyone on the team was like, yeah, but we want to work with them every single day. They just seem like an inspiring level of happiness about them. They seem like they're someone we want to be around. They'll learn animation. They'll figure out the differences. We'll help them get there. And that's a difference that you get when it's people want to work with you, want to help you, want to give you feedback, want to interact with you. And as simple as that seems, it's worth not losing in there, because I have met some people who earlier in their careers they were very skilled and they knew it. And they were also so unpleasant to deal with that ultimately they found their way out into something else. The other note there was dropping in there the importance of people who, no matter which one of these pathways they're navigating in life, how essential it is to at least to touch upon the details of contract negotiation, of navigating different opportunities from a professional lens, in that there are plenty of folks who have the talent, have the skill set, have put in the time, have the productive output, have the portfolio, but they wind up so underpaid in what they're doing and not having a sense for how to even find a common baseline, for how to kind of navigate those offers. It's where, actually, no, so here's a reference for this, right? So I think both Ryan Ike Audio and Akash the Car, which I'll put both of those, I think they're going to have Instagram links down below. Both of them have great advice about negotiating, about setting prices, about navigating that side of that life. And they're both coming from an audio lens. That's their primary careers. But both of them also, their tips extrapolate beyond that. I encourage checking out Akash and Ryan Ike. Advice for those processes and tips and techniques. Because really, again, you can produce the output. You can have the skills. You can be able to do it. If you're not cautious about going into it with some awareness of how you're interacting with people who have fundamentally a business lens, who are very, in fairness, budget constricted, but because of that, operating in a way they're sort of assuming you're going to have some pushback and so on, it can be to your disadvantage. And ultimately, it's not just about like, well, it's not about the money to me, or it's not as important. It can really be a fundamental deal breaker on, can you keep doing this long term? Can this be the career? Can this be the primary thing that you're focused in? Can come down to knowing how to navigate that side to it. So even if the focus of the course, the curriculum, the program can't be that, is making sure we don't want to completely omit it either. That if nothing else, I think what I suggested there was maybe it's not necessarily a part of what the teacher feels obliged to research and prepare material and reading on, but when they're looking at guest speakers to bring in, just as much as important to bring in a guest speaker speaking about how they animate, or how tools and trends have changed, or how they've, interactions with digital teams and so on, people with different skill sets and hats than they wear, it is worthwhile to make sure at least one person is coming in to speak to that, navigating the freelancer, independent contractor, contract negotiation, job search side to things. Anyway, there's a lot of other good tips in there, but those are mostly the ones that I had sort of brought up as looking at the curriculum. If you don't know, by the way, so my involvement on lots of school boards, advisory boards, curriculum settings, and so on, is totally done for free, right? That's volunteer work. That's not something I'm paid to do. Part of what enables me to do that is I have a Patreon for my company, patreon.com/GampKeto, and support is that in addition to supporting sponsored members of Home Team GameDev, who can take part in our worldwide freeware practice game development teams and support trainer calls and office hours calls, me planning their projects and learning the skills and planning out their pathline at no cost to them. The Patreon support, in addition to helping support those openings in Home Team, also helps support me being able to set aside the time, the energy, the effort that goes into volunteering at these schools, guest speaking at these schools, visiting these programs. That has been obviously slowed down from pandemic times, where this was a school I used to drive 3 hours to go visit and give talks at. I haven't been driving the 3 hours to give talks there because it's been completely distributed. Everyone's been exhausted, but things are moving back towards where that's going to be starting to pick up again. And so anyway, just a heads up there that if you're up for supporting what's going on at the high school level is awesome. And they are continuously trying to find the help and input and feedback from people who have a lens into how people at college age and career age are using these skills and how the technology and tools and trends and platforms are changing. And I'm trying to provide a lens to that. And it is something where ultimately it does take someone's time and energy to do that. And so obviously I would try to fit in as much as I can anyway, but that does help me do it in terms of being able to justify the hours I can shove towards those things, is the support that I receive through Patreon. So thank you to all the supporters on there. I've got other thoughts on my notes of things I want to chat about soon, but lots happening over here. More updates in the near future. Catch you today. Thanks for being here. Bye for now.